Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, July 27th, 2018. Shall we even bother doing a show today? Who knows whether what we cover by the beginning of the show will still be news by the end of the show. So much happening, at least last night. I didn't want to go to sleep. I mean, I did. I did go to sleep, and I did want to go to sleep, but I didn't want to miss anything. And what a long news cycle yesterday was. There was just so much going on, even late at night. I guess the last thing I noticed before giving up, finally, was, I don't know what to do about it. I don't know what to think about it. I said it in the Morning Post. It looks for all the world, I think, or most of the world, let's say 75% of the world, that Michael Cohen has finally flipped. And it's broken out into open warfare between Donald Trump and Michael Cohen, which, ordinarily you would say that can't be a good thing for the upcoming indictments and various trials slated to begin and the ongoing investigation, etc. And yet you really have no idea whether he's telling the truth or not, or whether he's really flipping, or whether he's making some kind of a play to make it look like this. I've stopped hoping, I guess, that each straw that looks like it's going to break the camel's back, the poor camel, is really unfair to this poor camel. Things keep getting drawn out, and the wheels of justice turn slowly, et cetera, et cetera. But when are we going to be done with this already? I have no idea. I mean, we literally have no idea whether Michael Cohen is doing this for real or what. I don't know why he would have held out so long. I don't know why he worked for Donald Trump for so long, if any of this is true. And, in a way, it seems so just sort of out of the blue. It was what you hoped would happen, but the fact that it actually just, presented itself and fell onto your table makes me think that, is something going on here? Is there some reason that the Trump defense team thinks having Michael Cohen look like he's going to flip is a good thing? I have no idea. So take it all with a grain of salt, I guess. That's where we are this morning. Daily Co's Radio is live now. Thanks, Bill, for waking up early with us. The breaking news: Michael Cohen reveals that Trump knew about today's meeting between me, Kagro X, and his microphone before it happened. It's true. Inside knowledge. And really sort of observance of history would have told you that the 9 o'clock a.m. Eastern time, whether standard or daylight, if there is such a thing as standard anymore, will find me usually at the microphone, unless I'm on vacation, and I could use another vacation. I need a vacation from my vacation. I need a vacation just from catching up from my vacation. So many things are happening. Where do we go? Where do we turn to? I don't know. We'll take a look at the Twitter feed and what's coming in today and things we put away in pocket. We can only hope to get about halfway through all the things that probably just happened yesterday, which will leave us with an additional deficit on top of everything else. Speaking of the deficit, interesting developments these days, and people who are still keeping an eye on that stuff, and it's fewer and fewer of us. And it never really, I guess, as it turns out, it never really mattered. But I did see the other day, where let me see, I'll have to dig up the retweet of this thing. It's somewhere out there. But, the record of the Republicans in unitary control of all three branches for the past year or so, plus, of course, their continuing control of Congress since even before the 2016 elections, has naturally resulted in an explosion of the debt and deficit. And this despite, of course, the various promises of the Republicans that now that they were in charge of everything, it would all be getting better. And, of course, that means exactly the opposite. We'll see if I can't dig that up somewhere around here. I did see somebody who actually had the facts and figures about what the debt and deficit I don't remember which figure they were following, was when Paul Ryan, that serious wonk, the wonk's wonk, really, came into office as a serious budget hawk and proceeded to double and or triple the deficit, which, it's like no small thing, I guess. I don't know whether it really matters at all, if money matters at all, or if that's real money or what, but, no one will be holding him to account, of course, and he will retire as the biggest budget wonk in history, plus also kind of dreamy. And did you know he did PX90? So very important facts to know about. Why follow the budget when you can follow what his workout schedule is? All right, I'm not seeing it immediately, but I'm sure we can catch up with it perhaps over the break. We'll find it eventually. Let's go to what else is news this morning. One thing that we found out yesterday, and I didn't put any news about this aside, but I just thought I'd make mention of it. Betsy DeVos and her family own 10 yachts. Did you know that? We probably didn't. I don't think any of us actually knew it before yesterday. The news that brought it to light, of course, and I'll have to go again, I said to myself, I won't be talking about this. This is not important, so therefore I won't put a news article about it aside. Someone somewhere, some, I guess, hero of the Republic, I don't know whether they knew what they were doing because, I didn't know Betsy DeVos had any yachts. I mean, I guess I would have guessed. If you'd asked me, do you think that's a family that has any yachts, I would have said, yeah, sure, of course, they're very rich. And I guess if you had asked me how much does the yacht cost or how many of them do you have, I probably would have missed my guess. But as it turns out, here we go. I got a Washington Post story about it. And the deal is she had at least this one yacht, a $40 million vessel. That's a significant yacht, a significant amount of money to wrap up in a yacht, called the Sequest. Though it apparently is a lake-going yacht, don't ask me why, was docked in Huron, Ohio, where I keep my yacht, well, 2 of my 10 yachts. And anyway, someone untied it and set it adrift, which I guess is a risk with all boats and yachts in particular. And I don't know whether they knew it was her yacht or not, or they just thought, this looks like an awfully dumb boat to have floating in Huron, Ohio. Let's get rid of it. Let's see. Here's the Washington Post coverage of it. Someone untied Betsy DeVos's yacht in Ohio. Damage ensued. And I hope they didn't damage anybody else's boat unless they were, rich a-holes, I guess. I don't know whether you can control for that. But I get the urge, certainly, if that's what they're doing, to untie Betsy DeVos's yacht. But anyway, I guess the bigger story, really, in all of this is that it develops in the coverage that, this is actually, this $40 million yacht is one of 10 that the family owns. I don't know how many members they have of their family, but I guess everybody gets their own yacht. And that seems a little excessive to me, and probably to most of Americans. But YOLO, LOL, nothing matters. A yacht owned by the family of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos suffered damage when someone untied it early Sunday in Ohio, setting it adrift on Lake Erie with the crew on board, which, that must have taken them by surprise. A crew member on the Sequest called police to report that he and other members awoke to find the yacht floating away from the dock. The crew managed to gain control of the vessel because it's a vessel and it's boats are really designed to let people gain control of them. So I'm not too worried about setting it adrift with a crew on board, but okay. They managed to gain control of the vessel thanks to the powerful engines on board and their impulse steered by rudders. You know how boats work. But not before it scraped the dock. It scraped the dock, everybody. Now, hopefully I don't know who owns the dock. And it's a mom and pop dock, and you know how it is. I hope everything's okay. You hear the concern in my voice? The yacht suffered $5,000 to $10,000 in damage, according to a Huron Police Department report, which on a $40 million yacht, who knows whether that's significant or not. And, the outer panels that they build yachts out of, I'm sure, are made out of expensive material. She's got a solid gold yacht, which I didn't even think could float. But there you go. $5,000 to $10,000 worth of damage from scraping the dock. If you this is why most of us don't own any boats at all, much less $40 million yachts. If you scrape a dock, it's $10,000. So you better be a multi-billionaire. Bob Lippert, chief of the Huron Police Department, said it's unclear whether the vandal knew the yacht belonged to the family of DeVos, whose controversial positions on education have made her the target of ire. If you had just walked by it, you wouldn't know that, Lippert said. But would you? I mean, I have this question in mind. What else is tied up at the dock in Huron, Ohio? Now, there's clearly nothing outwardly, that says this is Betsy DeVos's yacht on it. They don't paint those letters on the outside of it, I assume. I mean, they're very gauche, I'm sure, but I doubt that they did that. But, and it might be that, okay, I didn't know it was Betsy DeVos's yacht, but Voss? I think most people tell me that when they correct me, they say Voss. Just DeVos. Go ahead. Say it that way. Don't give it any foreign accenting. But I don't know what else is there. I mean, maybe it's a ritzy place. I have no idea what goes on at the dockside in Huron, Ohio. But I wonder whether the thing just sticks out like a sore thumb. I don't know whose yacht this is, but they're an asshole, and we should just untie it. That might have been all you needed to know about this thing. Anyway, the police chief went on. He noted the yacht's arrival made headlines in Huron. Sequest yacht docks in Huron. An article in the Sandusky Register read last week, and that's quite a headline. People docked it, of course. It wasn't the Sequest yacht that docked itself, and I guess, the article begins, the Sequest yacht, famously owned by Betsy DeVos, the U.S. Secretary of Education, docked in Huron Friday. The article began. So, there's no way to know it's Betsy DeVos's yacht, except that the local newspaper said, hey, everybody, the Sequest yacht came here on Lake Erie and has docked here in Huron. And Betsy DeVos owns it. And it's here. And it's $40 million. If you're trying to decide which of the boats at the Huron dock is it's the Sequest, and it costs $40 million. It's like they were asking for it. Look, did you see what that yacht was wearing? I mean, come on. You shouldn't be doing this. But it is funny. Lippert said it is possible the untying of the yacht. I like that construction. The untying of the yacht. He didn't not untie the yacht, I can tell you that. Happened without a target in mind. Tourists flocked to bars nearby during summer. I don't understand that transition. Let me read that again. I think the police flocked to bars during press conferences. This is what happened here. Lippert, the police chief, said it's possible the untying of the yacht happened without a target in mind. Tourists flocked to bars nearby during summer. Is that supposed to mean a tourist might have gotten drunk and untied the yacht without knowing who it belongs to? I think that's what you're supposed to take away from it. Or is it like the untying of the yacht might have happened without a target in mind, like I don't know whose yacht it is, or I don't know which yacht this rope goes to. There's so much rope around here. Man, I had a little drink about an hour ago, and it went right to my head, and I just hate rope, and it's all over the sidewalk here. Get out of here, you ropes. I hope there's no yachts attached to you. Or better yet, I hope there is. Where is there a bar around here? I don't know what this is supposed to have to do with anything. I think he's trying to say drunk people are around and they hate yachts. It's quite possible that it was a random act by some late-night revelers, the police chief said. True. The education department did not respond immediately Thursday to a request for comment. Before she What would the education department say about something like this? If a yacht is untied in Huron and set adrift at 6, I guess you would say knots, heading eastward, and at the same time, a $60 million DeVos family yacht is untied on the, I don't know, what's the other end of Lake Erie? Is it Chicago on the other side? Which lake is that? I don't know. Great Lakes people have to help me out here. I was gonna go and take a look at a map, but this joke is not worth it. Still, the point is she has 10 yachts, and that's bad. Before she became Education Secretary, DeVos, who has a residence in Michigan, spent 3 decades advocating for charter and private schools from her yacht. The daughter of an auto parts manufacturer, which, meaning, billionaire, not like, I'm a machinist. She married Richard DeVos, an heir to the Amway fortune. DeVos flies on her own plane when on official travel. And that's nice of her to pick up the tab for that. She probably thinks America's fleet of executive jets is too shabby. And I guess apparently she's doing some of this travel by boat. If she needs to cross the Great Lakes, she goes by yacht. Her positions have inspired protests at many of her engagements. Teachers' unions have roundly rebuked her, and civil rights groups disappointed in her moves to roll back protections for students have assailed her. Sailed, get it? Assailed. Why am I reading this? At her first school visit to a middle school in the district, that is the District of Columbia, this is the Washington Post we're reading here, protesters blocked her from entering the building, and one appeared to lay a hand on her. Not even a $40 million hand. Shortly thereafter, U.S. Marshals began guarding the secretary rather than the officers employed by the department. The Huron police chief said that although nobody was injured on Sunday, untying the boat could have caused far more damage if conditions had been different. Had the winds been different or more boat traffic, we would have had a bad situation with a collision or something of the sort, Lippert said, because all boats are adrift and no one can steer around a $40 million yacht. How can you see that coming? I mean, it certainly could have caused more damage. Also, if there had been a Sharknado at the time, that clearly would have caused a lot more damage. Had Judge Smales been on board the boat, who knows what would have happened? Or the other guy. I'm sure lots of people remember the name of Rodney Dangerfield's character from Caddyshack, but it was famously ethnic and difficult to pronounce from the written. Anyway, Judge Smales would have surely wrecked that thing. But anyway, what a weird thing. And I don't know where the news came from that she had 10 yachts, but I guess I could look that up just out of curiosity. DeVos, 10 yachts. Who developed that? There we are. Well, Vanity Fair is the first hit on this one. One of Betsy DeVos's 10 boats, and maybe they're not all yachts, one's a dinghy, was set free on Lake Erie, which is kind of very nice and spiritual sounding, and I'm sure that the person was greeted as a liberator. Anyway, it says, while significant damage was done to our $40 million yacht, the secretary is not hurting when it comes to water toys, which I'm just going to leave there. So, what's the deal here? Sequest, $40 million. It's 163 feet long, by the way. So that's most of Lake Erie right there. Per the Toledo Blade last Sunday, an unidentified person untied the DeVos boat, moored at a basin in Huron, Ohio. I should take a look at like a Google Maps satellite shot of this port, this dock, and see what else is there. Something popped up and moved all my stuff here. Wow, okay. Well, at any rate, she's got an awful lot of yachts, and this one is, I don't know if this is the biggest. I'm just sort of curious. Does anybody have any information on how many more of the boats that they own are of this size? I don't know. I guess that's probably just not something anybody has been reporting on. And good thing, too, because it's not really very interesting when you get right down to it. All right. Oh, you know who's been back and commenting these days via email? Gideon, our good friend Gideon from over in the UK, reminding us, yes, we do not want to encourage yacht damage. Why would you encourage something like that? Now, if the yacht did it of its own volition, I'm not going to get in the way of yacht self-determination. And it's really, we don't really know whether it was an unidentified reveler or just, the yacht, $40 million and 163 feet into the game, achieved sentience and set itself free. I don't want to speculate, but it was a hell of a story, ladies and gentlemen, and it preoccupied me this morning. And we should all basically go around saying that we have 10 yachts. I think that should be the way we greet each other in the morning. Hi, how are you? I have 10 yachts. Whether it's true or not, don't worry about it. I would say, we should raise awareness this way and just tweet that you have 10 yachts all day long. Michael Musson says we are not K-N-O-T, sure. Who untied the yacht? Boo. What are you trying to do? And let's see. Arliss Bunny. Everybody, well, look, I thought this was a stupid idea to talk about the yacht, but it's Friday and everybody's enjoying it. Arliss Bunny says, silly Kagro X, they need multiple yachts so that they can keep them docked at various ports around the world. Betsy can't be expected to wait for her Great Lakes-based yacht to get to Cannes. Is that how do you say that city? They have a film festival. We should know all about that. And I think because it's in France, I am tempted to say, and I think I hear other people even say, give it sort of a fancy pants con sort of, but I think it's actually Cannes. Anyway, you can't have that. You can't wait for your Great Lakes-based yacht to get all the way to, let's say, the coast of France or wherever. Every time she needs to float around for a weekend, her tan would suffer. Is she a tanning person as well? She's making it look much better than Donald Trump's spray-on tan. That's certainly the case. And yeah, it's actually true that I guess the ultra-wealthy who have multiple yachts probably do, in fact, dock them all over the place. And, you can't wait for your yacht. I assume also that she probably uses it sort of as a residence or a floating hotel when she's going anywhere near wherever. But I don't know, Lake Erie. It borders a lot of places you might end up. And I guess you could do a school tour just sailing around the Great Lakes on your various yachts. But I don't know if that's good for your PR or not. Albert Titus saying someone obviously wanted to allow the yacht to continue on its quest for the sea. And I think that's probably about as likely as anything else. Go Sea Quest. Be free. I have no idea who, owns you. It just doesn't really matter. Anyway, but fly and be free. Or float, be free, I guess. And good luck to you. Ricky says, let's see, they just give the grandkids yachts the way my grandfather gave us bicycles. That's probably true. They're big into their family there, and I think we're supposed to be, if we were brainwashed enough, we're supposed to walk around saying, "Now, I don't begrudge anybody their hard-earned wealth, but don't you think?" And I think this may be raising consciousness, and people might be begrudging her anywhere from 1 through 10 of her yachts at this point. Anyway, I guess everybody loved the idea of talking about untying this one yacht and the fact that she has 10. It's it'll come back up, I'm sure of it. All right, let's see. Other things that we need to round up that might also be important, but that we have time to do before the break. Oh, okay. Well, that limits things a little bit. Let's see. We know the Michael Cohen situation. And the basics of it, the basic big development was that he has indicated somehow, because I haven't read any of the stories, I'm just reading the tweets and watching people laugh at the fact that it's happening, is that Michael Cohen says he's willing to testify to Mueller, which is interesting because he's not actually currently under investigation. Well, he may be under investigation by Mueller, but his real trouble, his real concrete legal troubles are in that one case that was in fact referred to the Southern District of New York rather than taken on by Mueller. But word is that he's willing to tell, well, I guess anybody will listen, that he knows, he has personal knowledge of Donald Trump's personal knowledge of the purpose of Donald Trump Jr.'s upcoming meeting in Trump Tower to collude with the Russians, to meet with Natalia Veselnitskaya. In other words, the denials since the story broke from Donald Trump that he knew nothing about the meeting, he didn't know that the meeting was taking place, and that nobody told him about the meeting, could all be entirely untrue. Which, sucks for a person trying to establish their record for veracity as a president of the United States, but also may have many other legal implications along the way, and we're just not sure what they're going to be. Let's take a look at Mark Sumner's summation of the issue, although we are coming up on a break, and we'll begin with this and then take a short break, and maybe I'll grab some cooling beverage as the temperature continues to rise here, and we'll make this a topic of discussion when we come back. I'll let you know we're looking at the headline. CNN, that loser network that is totally failing or whatever, reports Cohen to testify Trump knew in advance about Trump Tower meeting with Russian agents. This is Mark's piece from late-ish last night on the subject. After days of back and forth between legal teams for Donald Trump and Michael Cohen, it appears that Cohen has decided to flip. And by the way, I am still looking for this. Some weeks ago, when a lot of the some of the special elections were going on, and lots of people were sharing online those fantastic little GIFs that said flipped, in red and blue letters, and they would switch, and they flipped upside down and backwards and forwards, and it looked like a template, and they would drop the face of the politician who had won the seat in the flip election. And I've been looking for somebody to put Michael Cohen's and other witnesses' faces in there. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. As I was saying when I left before, I have 10 yachts, and I hope you do too. Have a nice day. And we were actually just getting started with a different topic, not my having 10 yachts, but reading in Mark Sumner's piece from, it appeared on the front page around 9:45 Eastern Time last night. CNN reports Cohen to testify Trump knew in advance about Trump Tower meeting with Russian agents. And I think we're all admitting that they're Russian agents now, right? After days of back and forth between the legal teams, right, it appears Cohen has decided to flip. And then I said, can somebody please make me one of those flipped GIFs and put Michael Cohen's face in it? And really, it should be for everybody who agrees to be a cooperating witness. Anyway, as of last night, CNN was reporting that Cohen is willing to testify. I don't know that that means that he's set to testify, but he's willing to testify, he says. Anyway, the Trump knew in advance about the infamous Trump Tower meeting in which Donald Trump Jr. and Trump's senior campaign staff met with Russian operatives. This would completely contradict statements that Trump and Trump's staff have, including Sarah Sanders, Rudy Giuliani, and other members of Trump's legal team, have made on at least 15 occasions. And what occasions they were. We marked the first 10 of those 15 with a new yacht. I have 10 yachts, everybody. It would at least imply that Trump knew that the purported purpose of the meeting to solicit harmful information on Hillary Clinton from the outset. But both Trump's pretense of not knowing about the meeting until months later and the excuse that Trump produced stating that the meeting was primarily about adoption would then be revealed as utter lies. And Everyone hates lies, but utter lies, I assume, are considerably worse. Trump claimed he did not know about the meeting until shortly before information about it was published after he took office. I read it in the newspaper just like the rest of you. Among those making denials about Trump's knowledge of the meeting was Donald Trump Jr., but importantly, this was in testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee that Trump Sr. was unaware of the meeting at the time. While Donald Trump's lies about his knowledge might serve Robert Mueller's ongoing investigation into obstruction, the statement from Trump Jr. would simply be lying to Congress. Making materially false statements in congressional testimony is a breach of federal law, even if it is not offered under oath. That's true. However, rich person, famous person's son, so yada, yada, yada. CNN does not believe that any of the Cohen recordings now in possession of the FBI contains this information. But Cohen would testify to Trump's knowledge. Trump attorney Rudy Giuliani has responded to CNN's reporting by calling Cohen not credible. And he's not. And neither is Michael Cohen. That is definitely true. So, it's problematic. But I think we'll be able to sort this out. It does not appear, it also doesn't not appear, as of Thursday evening, Cohen has made an actual arrangement with the special counsel's office, or anybody else's for that matter, in order to offer that testimony. Instead, the offer of testimony concerning Trump's knowledge of the meeting seems to be more of an offer put forward by Cohen in the hopes of securing a deal from someone. And we don't know who. Steve Bannon had previously come just short of saying that Trump knew about the meeting, saying that the odds that Trump Jr. did not talk it over in advance were zero. And I think that was put more succinctly, and I think with perhaps somewhat more aplomb earlier today. LOL GOP, as a matter of fact, tweeting, I love that this all hinges on us believing that a son whose entire life is a plea for his dad's attention didn't tell his dad the most interesting thing happening in his entire existence. And that does put sort of a fine point on it, doesn't it? It would be very difficult to believe that he didn't discuss it in advance. And P.S., I want to believe it very, very badly. So could you help me out with that? Objective reality. Thank you. Anyway, I have 10 yachts. An update here at the end. Is that what this is? This comes, about half an hour later. Cohen's legal team has indicated that Cohen did not leak the information, and speculation has pointed to Rudy Giuliani or some other member of Trump's team as the source of the story. Boy, they are really, I guess, I was going to say, well, up to now they've been unpredictable, but at this point, maybe we should just start predicting what's the worst thing, based on what we know now, that their legal team could possibly do, and I guess that's probably the next thing coming. Why would they leak it? I don't know. But up until yesterday, I couldn't think of a good reason why the Trump legal team would have waived privilege on the recording that Michael Cohen had of he and Trump discussing the payoff to the Inquirer for their capturing and killing the Karen McDougal story. But at the very end of the show, and I don't know if I was able to make it clear as the microphones turned off yesterday exactly what this was all about. But you remember this, just to take a break from this story. We're like one line away from the end of this story. So let me just read the finishing of the finishing comment here on the update from Mark Sumner about the latest Cohen story. It may be that the source of the story, as he's saying, is Trump's team. However, this seems like an idiotic play, like a play that even Trump would recognize as profoundly dunderpated, like a play that even Rudy Giuliani would understand as a seriously bad move. Stay tuned. But like I said, up until yesterday, or the day before, I guess, for me, it was still, I still had difficulty grasping why the Trump team would have waived privilege on that recording. And the explanation offered up was that it had perhaps been hinted by the special master, remember that person, who had been appointed to sort out whether or not the claims of attorney-client privilege asserted by the Trump team over the various things seized in the raids of Michael Cohen's home, office, and hotel room were in fact entitled to privilege. And the speculation was that perhaps the special master had hinted that this particular tape, or maybe that one or others like it, or all such tapes, were likely not going to be protected under attorney-client privilege, not because they weren't the product of an attorney speaking to his client, but rather because although they would ordinarily be presumed to be privileged, they would fall under the crime fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege under the federal rules of evidence. And I guess probably it's a good time to offer up something along the lines of an explanation of what the crime fraud exception is that you could sit and peruse and read for yourselves, or that we could share with you. And, we could grab a quickie explainer for you. But basically the deal is the way the structure of it works, without getting into reading through an explanation, although there's a Lawfare blog version that is specific to the Michael Cohen situation that might be helpful. But the basics is this. Ordinarily, the communications between an attorney and his or her client is privileged. And that's, the sort of thing you learn about from crime dramas or, television or whatever. You might have seen it. And it's, I think widely understood, generally speaking. But it doesn't mean that anything that gets said between an attorney and client is privileged, period. There are exceptions, and one of the big worrying ones, I guess, is the crime fraud exception. If you plot to commit a crime either with your attorney or let your attorney know about your plot to commit the crime, and it is very obviously a crime, etc., then, that would be the sort of thing that the court would say, we're willing to overcome the presumption of privilege here in the interest of justice. If you can't protect yourself from prosecution from a crime by committing it in cooperation with an attorney, an officer of the court. That's not going to fly. Therefore, if it's fairly obvious that that's what's going on, you probably wouldn't expect to see the material in question protected by the attorney-client privilege. It wouldn't prevail in court if it was contested. So, faced with the possibility, and I will say this, I don't really know whether a special master or this particular special master would ordinarily be inclined to tip off one or both, for that matter, hopefully both parties to the issue, how they were going to rule. I'm not certain that I believe that the special master would be particularly interested in giving the president's legal team the opportunity to save face by making its own decision about what to do with the tapes rather than waiting for a pronouncement, a finding from the special master that this was going to fall under, in her opinion, the crime fraud exception. Though I guess it's possible, that behavior is changed by the fact that one of the parties to this case is the President of the United States, and maybe you do give them the opportunity, especially since the only alternative that they might feasibly exercise is the release of the tape. And that would be almost as embarrassing and perhaps almost as damaging to the president personally and to his case as simply waiting it out and having a finding handed down that the president was involved in a crime, a fraud, both. That's because that's obviously the only implication you can draw from this. This won't be protected, and it won't be protected because I, as special master, have found that the president and his attorney engaged in the planning of a crime here. Once that's announced, who knows what happens next? So I guess it's possible that the special master might have said, I'll give you the opportunity to simply take the blow from the substantive content of the tape up front and see if you can survive that. But again, I don't know why you afford them that luxury. Why worry about that? It shouldn't be on your mind. Anyway, like I said, this led me to a piece actually from April of this year. Paul Rosenzweig writing a piece at Lawfare blog, just sort of curious about whether this helps add anything to this. Michael Cohen, attorney-client privilege, and the crime-fraud exception. This will give us an even better and more organized explainer, I guess. The world is awash in hot takes, he says, on the news that President Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, is under criminal investigation. Remember, this is back in April. We all know this now. On Monday, which was back in April, again, the FBI executed a search warrant at his home, his office, and a hotel room that he rented. Oh, and by the way, I had wondered about that yesterday. I don't know if I got out on the air or whether it came afterwards. Kate Sherrill, I think, reminding me that the reason for the hotel room at all was that his home is allegedly under renovation. And so I guess they were living in the hotel room during the renovations. I was wondering, I think he may have originally taken out at least one hotel room in the hopes that people would not know about it and that he would be therefore able. I think he just like rents it forever. You know how some people actually, wealthy people actually will sometimes just live in a hotel suite permanently or more or less permanently. I think that my speculation was that it was possible he had done that and just rented it long term and was using it as a place that he could go and work, but also store things that he thought were in danger of seizure in the event of a raid of his home and or office, and that it was rather foolish of him to, during the renovation, then decide to stay at this very self-same hotel room, thereby calling attention to its existence. But, I may have been wrong in my speculation to begin with. Or it's entirely possible this guy we're still marveling that he didn't have the brains to start separate and distinct LLCs. I think he may likely have made this rather ridiculous mistake too. That's entirely possible. Anyway, back to Lawfare here. After the raid, claims are already resonating that the search violated Trump's attorney-client privilege. Remember, that was at least his first assertion. Trump saying, "This is outrageous. A raid on my attorney's offices by itself is on its face, a violation of the attorney-client privilege." Well, probably not in many respects, but also, in the end, it won't be. Attorney-client privilege won't cover all that much, probably. But it was an improper assertion. Poorly constructed syntactically, but also legally. But here we are. Claims were already resonating that the search violated attorney-client privilege and reflect more excess from the special counsel, Robert Mueller. Trump himself called the search a, quote, disgrace, and again threatened to fire Mueller. I, Paul Rosenzweig, want to take a step back and offer a few more thoughts that perhaps shed a little light on the attorney-client issue. That would be helpful, I think. As an aside, before doing so, I want to note the absurdity of Trump blaming Mueller for the search. As many others have pointed out, Mueller referred the matter to the Justice Department, where the investigation was assigned to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. That office, run by a Trump appointee, then procured the warrant with the approval of a magistrate judge and worked with the FBI to conduct the search. In this regard, the special counsel's actions and the Justice Department referral are completely unlike the Starr investigation on which I worked many years ago, Rosenzweig says. There, Attorney General Janet Reno kept expanding the Starr investigation into new areas, mostly, I think, as a matter of convenience. Here, the department seems intent on cabining the Mueller investigation to the scope it was originally initiated for, and to also be willing to spin off unrelated matters to the relevant local U.S. Attorney's Office. That's a good example of the system functioning as it should, and certainly is no disgrace. That was all parenthetical, by the way, which is amazing. And in fact, there's one case, at least I can see here, of parentheses inside of parentheses. Paul Rosenzweig, I guess, gets as easily distracted from the matter at hand as I do. So I'm not alone in this. Maybe that's why I like going back to that blog so often. Let's begin, he says, 20 minutes into it, with a seemingly obvious question. Why does an attorney-client privilege exist in the first place? After all, the privilege is nothing more nor less than permission for an attorney to withhold truthful information from investigating authorities. There aren't many other situations in which society says, you know the truth, but you don't have to tell us. Quite the contrary, the general rule is that the federal grand jury investigations are entitled to every man's evidence. Apologies for the traditional gendered phrase, he says. As the Supreme Court has put it, the exceptions to this general rule are not lightly created nor expansively construed, for they are in derogation of the search for truth. Soaring language. That's the way they like to do things. The attorney-client privilege is one such exception. And later on, we'll get to the exception to the exception. And it has been around for a long while. It is generally thought to have two important grounds. I think you all inherently understand this, but just for the sake of making it clear. First and foremost, the privilege encourages clients to be truthful with their lawyers. That ain't happening with Donald Trump. We already know that. If a defendant thought that would be an interesting way of attacking the attorney-client privilege. Well, the first ground on which the attorney-client privilege is constructed is to encourage clients to be truthful with their lawyers. That's not happening, so I don't know. One of the two bases for even creating such a privilege in the first place is out the window with Donald Trump. Do we really need to afford this to him? All right. If a defendant, though, in the ordinary course of things, a non-Trump defendant, thought his attorney would be compelled to turn around and repeat what he had said, the defendant would, in turn, be most unlikely to tell his lawyer the unvarnished version of what happened. To be sure, this is already often the case, as anyone who has ever practiced criminal defense law will tell you, but it would be the case even more if the privilege didn't exist. And so maybe it wouldn't be such a great argument. And so many think the attorney-client privilege is actually fostering the truth-finding function of the courts in a second-order way. If defense attorneys, for example, know more about what has happened, then they will be able to make the testing function of a trial function more effectively. Short term, the ability to get attorneys to rat out their clients is lost. Long term, better functioning justice system is gained. I should add that although I've talked here about criminal law, the same rationale applies to the civil context as well. One may or may not think this judgment is empirically correct, but it isn't nonsensical. That's good. Finally, at bottom, well, it's not nonsensical. It's not nonsensical either, so okay. Now, there's a second reason, and it's closely related, but it applies only to the criminal side of investigations, namely that the privilege is an important adjunct to the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. If a defendant cannot be compelled to testify against himself, the privilege would be, this is good, strongly weakened. Editors, weigh in here. The privilege would be strongly weakened if his attorney could be compelled to say what he had said. In other words, if you have the right not to incriminate yourself and to invoke the Fifth Amendment, I'm not going to give testimony that would tend to incriminate me. I don't think it's fair that you make my attorney give it in my place just because I shared it with him once before. This rationale is less about fostering attorney-client transparency and more about protecting criminal rights, but it gets to the same place. So, as an initial matter, let's begin by, again, we're beginning, now 30 minutes into things, by acknowledging that there is a real social value in the attorney-client privilege. And that is just as true for the relationship between President Trump and his attorney as it is for you and me. No, it isn't. But okay. But that also has to do with the nature of his attorney. Anyway, as I've noted before, we don't defend norms by breaking them. And that is precisely why, as many have noted, the U.S. Attorney's Manual has an entire section that limits how and when the offices of an attorney may be searched. Obviously a sensitive area, and they've had to do it before, and so they have some guidelines. Realizing full well that such searches are in derogation of the value of the privilege, the manual requires high-level approvals, the exhaustion of other investigative avenues, and specifies procedures that are to be followed to limit the intrusion on privileged documents. All that said, a number of factors that need to be considered seem to make this search a little different. First, for the attorney-client privilege to exist, there must actually be an attorney-client relationship regarding a specific matter. It's problematic with Cohen, of course. I, for instance, will have to hire you to help me resolve a tax dispute with the IRS. The representation is limited to that matter, and so is the privilege. Other things I may have told you in passing, for example, about the fight I am having with my wife and how I beat her, this is a hypothetical, are outside the scope of the representation and are not privileged. Get it? The law is clear that as a general matter, a person cannot claim to have an attorney for all matters that might arise. As an aside, one reason for this rule is that it would frustrate legitimate investigation, as was the case when John Gotti, the famous mafia don, suggested that his attorney, Bruce Cutler, represented him in everything, thereby attempting to make it unlawful for the government to wiretap or use an undercover agent to speak to him about new matters. Indeed, the cases are legion for the proposition that representation of a defendant in connection with one criminal matter does not encompass representation in connection with a separate and even an arguably related criminal matter. One example, see Illinois v. Perkins, a 1990 case which says the defendant charged with aggravated battery may be contacted undercover in a murder investigation. Now, why is this relevant? Because President Trump has said quite publicly that he did not know what Cohen was doing with respect to alleged payments to the actress known as Stormy Daniels. Payments that appear to be at the core of the Southern District of New York's investigation. No longer the core necessarily, but okay. He has said that he was unaware of the payments and did not know why they were made, and suggested that the press had to ask Michael about them. If this were true, then it seems that Trump could not have had an attorney-client relationship with Cohen regarding the Daniels payment in the first instance. One hallmark of an attorney-client relationship is agreement as to its scope and the attorney's obligation to keep the client advised as to all significant material matters, of which settlement would surely be one. By his own testimony, therefore, it seems that the Daniels matter is outside the scope of matters in which Cohen has represented Trump, and thus there is no attorney-client privilege in the first instance. But that's an excellent point, and I didn't see it much discussed, although I know it probably was much discussed because it's fairly obvious. But just another example of Trump, professing to understand areas of law, probably based on watching television courtroom dramas. There's an attorney-client privilege. This is a disgrace. This whole thing is corrupt because you can't, outrageous that you would involve a search of an attorney's office. What about my attorney-client privilege? Well, he's not your attorney for these purposes. Sure he is. He's an attorney and he's mine. I own him. I pay him. That's that. He represents me in everything. A lot of lay people make the mistake about whether or not they're represented by people who give them advice on other things, even if they are, and very often it's like, well, he's the family attorney. He's been my attorney in everything I've ever done. Well, yes, but then again, you don't perhaps fully understand the law. If you did, you might not need him as your attorney, although, again, you'd be ill-advised to represent yourself in most legal proceedings. But you would know. Anyway, go to law school. You'll have a better idea of whether or not you have an attorney-client relationship with somebody in this kind of situation. Anyway, but he continues, if you assume the contrary, let's assume that Trump and Cohen did have an agreement and that Trump is not being candid about what he knew, which is another kettle of fish altogether. If that is the case, in other words, if he really did know about it and really did authorize the payments, well, then maybe they do have an attorney-client relationship. Now, Trump might have told Cohen then about his version of what really happened. He might have asked Cohen to make sure his wife did not find out, might have promised to pay Cohen back for the settlement funds, etc. All of these hypotheticals, and again, we don't really know, they're all the sorts of confidential communications that are presumptively protected by the privilege, and the privilege applies whether these communications happened orally or in writing. By the way, what then could be the basis for the Southern District of New York's search and review of these materials that at least facially would be protected? That brings us to something known as the crime-fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege. It is, if you will, and you should, because you're going to have to for the next couple of minutes, it is an exception to the exception that allows the government to read, review, compel production of, and compel testimony of an attorney and his or her records. It arises if and only if the client uses the attorney's services to commit a crime. So to be clear, it does not apply retrospectively, as when I tell you about a crime I have already committed. An easy example of this would be if I use an attorney to help me draft an affidavit that I am going to submit to a court, and the affidavit is false, then I have used the attorney's help to commit a crime. You see, it's a very, it has to be forward-looking, prospective. The lawyer may not know that the crime is afoot, and indeed usually does not, since notwithstanding the public derision, most attorneys would not knowingly assist a client in committing a crime, and he may be completely ignorant. But if the government can show a court that there is a basis for thinking that the crime has occurred, well, then things are very different. The attorney can and will be required to testify as to the nature of his interaction with the client. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's continue with our reading of the Lawfare article. And just in case the music distracted you toward the end, the situation is this. Remember that for the attorney-client privilege and the crime-fraud exception, the crime-fraud exception to the attorney-client privilege exception to the general rule that everybody deserves to hear the truth in these legal cases arises if and only if the client uses the attorney's services to commit a crime. It's not, hey, I murdered somebody and I need your help representing me in my criminal case. That's the ordinary course of affairs as between a client and an attorney. And the exception doesn't apply. Saying, hey, I am planning on murdering somebody and I need your help with defending me later, and can you give me some good advice about what pieces of evidence in particular are to be careful about hiding so that I don't get caught for this murder? That would be problematic, obviously, I think, on its face. But a better example is actually provided here, a more likely example. That is the example of saying, hey, I need to prepare an affidavit for court, and it's illegal to file a knowingly false affidavit. Could you help me, actually create that, to write that, write out that affidavit so I can lie to the court? That would be problematic, even though, very often people do that. They just don't tell their lawyers that they're about to lie. But, okay. Anyway, the point is, as he says here, an easy example would be drafting that affidavit that I'm going to submit to a court. I have, therefore, used the attorney's help to commit a crime, even if the lawyer doesn't know. But that's okay. It's your crime. It doesn't implicate the lawyer if they didn't know. So the lawyer should ordinarily, in this case, have no objection to saying, yeah, that's fine. Let's break the privilege here so that we can straighten out who's supposed to go to jail as between me and him. And the answer is him, not me. I'm sad about that because he was my client, but he lied. And if I say I helped him lie, we both go. If I say he lied and I didn't know about it, he goes. Please give me the opportunity to do that. That's a rather cynical way of looking at it, but hopefully the lawyer's honest all the way through. Anyway, if the government, though, he explains it this way, can show a court that there is a basis for thinking that the crime has occurred, in the example, the affidavit is a lie, then the attorney can and will be required to testify as to the nature of his interaction with the client. What did the client tell you is ordinarily a completely impermissible question, but it is a lawful question when there is a reason to think that the answer is X happened, and the lawyer took that answer and put it in the affidavit that was submitted to a court, and it turns out that the statement that X happened is a bald-faced lie. You can readily imagine other examples of when and how a lawyer's services might be used to commit a crime. The lawyer helps set up a shell corporation, which is a perfectly legal thing to do, ordinarily, and the corporation is used to foster a Ponzi scheme. The lawyer is asked about how to secure insurance, let's say, and the insurance is used to collect on an insurance fraud, and so on, things like this. In other words, the crime fraud exception applies when an attorney's advice is used to further the crime. Or, as the Supreme Court put it in Clark v. United States, 1933 case, a client who consults an attorney for advice that will serve him in the commission of a fraud or crime will have no help from the law. He must let the truth be told. And that, one suspects, is where the rubber meets the road. It may well be that President Trump sought Cohen's legal advice regarding the Daniels affair for an illegal purpose, e.g., to avoid federal campaign finance laws, or to conceal the true source of the funds with which she was paid, or to threaten her. In that circumstance, it seems clear that the crime fraud exception might apply, and it appears highly likely that the FBI and the lawyers in New York have made that showing to a federal magistrate. Or, as one observer put it, Michael Cohen is in serious legal jeopardy. President Trump may be as well. Now, some addendum at the end of the article, although really, I guess it's several. Addende? How would they say that? Here it is. A few helpful amplifications and additional points culled from some of the responses to this post. These are a bullet-pointed list here. The first begins, the privilege is not just subject matter specific, it is also person specific. If, for example, Cohen had privileged information provided by Jared Kushner, only Kushner would be able to assert the privilege to protect it, not President Trump. This may not make that much difference, since Cohen is obliged to defend the privilege for Kushner to the same effect as if Trump had asked him to. But if, hypothetically, Kushner waived the privilege in an effort to cooperate with New York investigators, Trump could not complain. Well, to no effect anyway. He would complain, to be sure. Second bullet point here, information shared with a third party is not privileged, ever. So anything that Cohen might have said to Daniels or her attorney, for example, is outside the scope of the privilege. Third, in order to be privileged, the information conveyed to the attorney must be for the purpose of seeking legal advice. So non-legal communications, not illegal communications, but non-legal communications, such as instructions on how to secure funds or where to transfer money. Those things are generally not protected. Finally, one point I elided because of the detail, but that in retrospect seems important. These fact-specific questions are why the government will employ a taint team. That is, a team of attorneys whose job it is to review all the evidence and pass to the prosecutors who are trying the case only that information that is demonstrably not subject to a privilege claim. That is, the team goes along with them on the search executed under the warrant, oversees the collection of evidence, and then they are the first ones to look at it. Their job in the case is only and is entirely limited to, if this is done right, the review of the evidence conducted with an eye towards passing on to prosecutors only that material which is clearly not subject to a privilege claim, and then all the rest of the things that about which there is any question are submitted to the judge for a ruling, or in this case to the special master. But that's the point of the manual the DOJ manual for the special instructions for executing a search warrant on an attorney's office, home, or in this case, hotel room, call for this precisely for this reason. There'll be a special team that goes along with them to make sure that it isn't, that it's not the case that even a conscientious prosecuting attorney who absolutely and without fail would faithfully observe the boundaries of attorney-client privilege, that it doesn't make any sense, in any way, shape, or form to have the prosecuting attorney reviewing evidence and then saying, yeah, that would be privileged, and so I'll just forget that existed and I won't use that in any way in my prosecution. That's not really something that can happen. So instead you have an entirely different crew that then doesn't participate in any other way in the preparation of the case against the defendant, does the deciding. This would be privileged. I have seen it. I can't testify to the contents of it because the attorney-client privilege would protect this, but I also will have no part in helping the prosecution team develop their case, and I won't talk about what I saw with them. And that's the best you can do to wall it off. But anyway, yes, to be sure, this makes the government the judge in its own case, but later on, a federal judge can see both sides of the wall and decide whether or not the call has been made accurately. Not only the special master, but judges and appeals courts thereafter. So, very interesting, very thorough explanation, and we thank Lawfare for providing it to us, and it makes you ready for the weekend. You'll be capable of discussing the attorney-client privilege and the crime-fraud exception all weekend at the various parties and functions you will be attending. Gideon had some other questions here. Let me see if I've caught up with all of them. One, do I think any senators are watching the Cohen developments? Yes, now. All of them, probably. Do I, let's see, he says, I don't see how Trump saying ask Cohen undermines anything. So this would be the situation in which the press asks Trump, did you know anything about the Stormy Daniels payments? Or what do you know now about them? And he says, I didn't know anything about it. Michael did it himself. I knew nothing about any payments to Stormy Daniels. You'll have to ask Michael if you want any information about it. How does it undermine anything? It establishes their lack of an attorney-client relationship with respect to the settlement or perhaps any aspect of the Stormy Daniels case. The fact that he professes to know nothing and that the only information about this can come from Cohen means that though Cohen is an attorney and though Cohen is very frequently Donald Trump's attorney for some pending matter, there's been no agreement reached between Trump and Cohen with respect to his representing Trump as an attorney, in his capacity as an attorney, with respect to the Stormy Daniels case. I mean, I guess he could say, he's my attorney in this, and you'll have to ask him. And that would throw some of it into confusion. But then at bottom, well, first of all, what he was asking and what he was asserting was, I know nothing about it. I know nothing about the request for funds. I know nothing about the payment of funds. I know nothing about the terms on which those payments were made. And if he knows nothing about it, then he would also not know that he had made a deal with Michael Cohen to represent him in that. If he did not have any knowledge of any such deal, then there can't be any such deal, because what defines a attorney-client relationship in this case is, did you engage this attorney to represent you here? No, you didn't, because you didn't know anything about it. Well, then whatever he did on your behalf here isn't privileged. Now, Trump could be lying about that, but that just creates a different issue for which he would have to answer. No, I didn't have any attorney-client relationship with that person. I don't know anything about this situation, which means I have no attorney-client relationship with. Okay, fine. What if you're lying? Well, when you get to court and say, no, this can't be admitted as evidence because I had an attorney-client relationship with this person and this is privileged information, right? And you say, but you said before that you didn't know anything about it. Well, I was lying then. Oh, well, guess what? That doesn't actually help you at this juncture. That is a admission against interest. And in the when it comes to here, I guess it would be constructed this way. When it comes to answering the question about whether or not this piece of information is privileged under the attorney-client relationship, I look first to find out, is there an attorney-client relationship? The evidence that's been submitted so far on that question is that the defendant says, no, there was no attorney-client relationship. The defendant now claims that he was lying at the time he said that. Now, should we admit into my consideration of whether or not there's an attorney-client relationship the prior lie? And, can I say, all right, well, he says he was lying then. So he was either lying then or he's lying now. I'm not sure which one it is. And I'm going to have to weigh the evidence. And I could admit under the rules of evidence to my consideration here the statement he's just made, which was, I do have an attorney-client relationship and I was lying then. And that position would prevail if you could exclude from consideration the hearsay statement made earlier to the press that there was no, or what amounted to, an admission that there was no attorney-client relationship, because I didn't know anything about this. The definitional level, he's saying, at the definitional level, he was earlier lying that he had no attorney-client privilege. So I'm either stuck with the new revised version and nothing else, or I can admit as a prior out-of-court statement against interest the admission that there is no attorney-client privilege, and then I take a look at the situation and weigh it and say, I really can't justify excluding this as attorney-client privilege if in the first instance the client denies the very existence of an attorney-client relationship. It may be that he was lying then, it may be that he's lying now, but if he's lying now, he's likely doing so in the hopes of using his attorney's services to commit the crime of covering up his previous lie about the existence of the attorney-client relationship. And on balance, the equities tell me I just can't go any further. Now, Trump hasn't gone to court yet, that's true, but it won't matter. Like I said, the earlier statement would be admissible as evidence because it's a statement against interest. That's an exception to the hearsay rule under the federal rules of evidence, and I guess we haven't discussed that yet. But I hope that a quick run through, I hope A, I've done it accurately, and B, that helps explain things. All right, well, and of course some of these things are so specific, you're really going to need to see the procedural posture with which the questions develop and on what basis they are posed. And there's always room for argument. If there wasn't, there would be no jobs for the lawyers in all of this. All right, let's see. I think we'll move on unless there are more questions, and if they come in, we can always circle back to them. Let's see what else is going on via Twitter. I think we're all caught up on the various comments from Twitter, and we can pick and choose from among the rest of the topics lined up here in Pocket. Let's see. On the same front, I suppose we should catch up on the reporting over here in the New York Times that an actual attorney for the Trump Organization, Alan Weisselberg, appears to be on the spot now, too. New York Times reporting Alan Weisselberg, Trump Organization's finance chief, may be questioned. Excellent. Reporting here it's excellent that there's a story. We'll see how the reporting is. It is offered by Maggie Haberman, Michael Schmidt, and Sharon Lafreniere. Let's see. July 26th, that's yesterday. Federal investigators in Manhattan have asked to interview Alan Weisselberg, the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization as part of their investigation into President Trump's former lawyer, Michael D. Cohen, according to two people familiar with the matter. It was not clear whether Mr. Weisselberg was issued a subpoena or was asked to answer questions voluntarily. Either way, the development suggests that federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York are scrutinizing at least some financial dealings of the Trump family business, a line that the president has publicly warned the special counsel in the Russia investigation, Robert S. Mueller, not to cross. However, once again, I'll just remind you, in case they forget to tell you in the rest of this article, Robert Mueller is not crossing this line. It just said right here, if they don't see this, I'm going to I give up on the reporters. The development suggests that federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York are scrutinizing the family business, and yet I can't believe it. They're scrutinizing the family business, even though Trump warned Robert Mueller not to cross the red line. Well, he didn't. So what's the problem? The New York prosecutors, who are operating on a separate track, thank you very much, from Mr. Mueller's team, are investigating Mr. Cohen on a number of fronts, including payments he arranged before the presidential election to women who had claimed they had had affairs with Mr. Trump. The prosecutor's interest in Mr. Weisselberg was first reported by the Wall Street Journal. And I read that Weisselberg was himself an attorney, but at least here he's acting as the chief financial officer of the Trump Organization. He may in fact be both, but that will be an interesting twist to the case too. And by the way, before we get too carried away with the rather dry stuff here, but essential stuff, let's just at least whet the appetite with the salacious stuff, which is to say that what's his name? Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, now says, according to ABC News, I'll read their brief account of things just to spice up the New York Times stuff. Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, says 3 other women now, gotta kill the auto playing video here. 3 other women claim that they were paid by AMI, American Media Incorporated. That is the publisher of the National Enquirer, under the control of David Pecker. Was that the name, right? So the goofy name that we had to laugh at. That Karen McDougal's story is not the only one captured and killed on behalf of Donald Trump by AMI. In other words, you remember the capture and kill play. We solicit the exclusive rights to the story of a woman willing to allege in the newspaper that she had an affair with Donald Trump. They pay her for the exclusive rights to the story. She takes the money. They listen to the story. Then they simply decide not to publish it in the interest of, whatever their business interest is. People aren't going to like this story. It's not going to be popular. We decided to spike it. You can still keep the money. We're just not going to publish the story. And, well, I want the story told. I'll tell it to somebody else then. No. We bought the exclusive rights. Well, here's the money back. No. We don't want the money back. We just want the rights to the story. And then people find themselves at a loss. They're gagged. So Avenatti says, I guess, that he is now representing 3 other women who claim that they were paid by Donald Trump, AMI, and Michael Cohen to keep quiet. He was doing a panel in West Hollywood that included Mayor John Duran, for some reason, former federal prosecutor Steve Madison, and Mariana Magana Gamero, whoever that is. I guess the panel was part of the Coalition for Human Immigration Rights of Los Angeles. And human immigration rights are my favorite ones, by the way. During the panel, Avenatti stood up and announced the information to the audience. I guess it wasn't really to do with what was under discussion, but certainly interesting. He said the women claimed they were paid hush money by AMI Entertainment, Trump, and his attorney, Michael Cohen, who I guess wasn't his attorney, really. Anyway, he did not reveal what they were paid to stay quiet about. There are 3 additional female clients of mine that have not been disclosed that were paid hush money prior to the 2016 election, whether it be from Michael Cohen on behalf of the president, an entity Michael Cohen formed, or AMI, he said. And I wonder now, will we find out that he formed more than one entity finally? He added that one of the women claimed to be pregnant at the time and that he is in the process of getting clearance from his clients to release more details related to the payments. It was unclear if they may have been over affairs with Trump. Last time I checked, they weren't just handing out checks to anyone, whether they had a relationship or not, Avenatti said. He also addressed rumors that he may be considering a 2020 presidential run. Why not? Don't. If I do not get a sense that the Democratic Party has the right street fighter and the right person to go up against Donald Trump in a general election, I will absolutely run and I will defeat him, period, he said. Avenatti gained national attention for representing Stormy Daniels, as you know, filed a lawsuit against Trump. Daniels, whose real name is Stephanie Clifford, said she had sex with Trump in 2006 when he was married, but Trump denies it. Yada, yada, $130,000. The end. Okay, now back to the dry stuff over in the New York Times. Remember, it was not clear whether Weisselberg was issued a subpoena or was asked to answer questions voluntarily. Then the warning about the red line, and then the reminder that Trump doesn't know what he's talking about. Robert Mueller isn't conducting this investigation. The Southern District of New York is. So, the development set off alarm bells within the Trump organization, an umbrella company for Mr. Trump's holdings, because the scope of Mr. Weisselberg's responsibilities is so large, I guess. I've misread the sentence, but we fixed it at the end there. He has handled its finances for decades, has been involved with the Trump Foundation, right? Separate entity, but remember what trouble that was. We found out thanks to David Farenthold. He has managed the president's private trust and has at times reviewed the Trump presidential campaign's books, which is an interesting crossover for him. Mr. Weisselberg surfaced prominently this week when Mr. Cohen, through his lawyer, released a recording of a September 2016 conversation that he had with Mr. Trump about buying the rights to a former Playboy model's story. The former model, Karen McDougal, alleges an affair with Mr. Trump and had sold the rights to her story for $150,000 that summer to the National Enquirer. That's why I read you the Avenatti stuff. The newspaper, whose parent company's chief executive is a friend of Mr. Trump's, sat on the story, a practice known in the tabloid industry as catch and kill. Not capture, but catch and kill. Okay, fine. The president has denied an affair. Mr. Cohen told Mr. Trump he needed to form a company to buy those rights from the magazine. Mr. Cohen repeatedly referred to Mr. Weisselberg. I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up, Mr. Cohen told Mr. Trump. Later, he added, I spoke to Alan about it. When it comes time to the financing. That's kind of weird, but I guess that's the accurate quote. The words actually said. What's he talking about here? Forming an LLC, or I'm sure in Cohen's mind, I'll just use Essential Consultants, but whatever. I'm going to form a company. We're going to pay AMI to buy the rights. Interesting, because, of course, the whole point of it was they'll buy the rights and then decide not to publish the thing. And I guess that should be enough. And then I guess his offer to pay them back implicates him in, various other angles of the story. And I guess that's where they were talking about getting hit by a truck and all of this. Their worry was, maybe they trust David Pecker or whatever his name is to be true to the agreement not to run the story. But suppose he gets hit by a truck and the next editor publisher says, to hell with this voluntary deal with Trump. We own the rights. We're publishing the story. But if Trump, through some shell entity, purchases the rights, then they can't print the story. See? Okay. The release of the audio may have accelerated the activity of the New York prosecutors, who are looking into whether Mr. Cohen may have committed bank fraud and violated campaign finance laws by arranging payments to silence women whose accounts could have damaged Mr. Trump's chances of becoming president. The New York Times revealed the existence and contents of the tape last week. CNN broadcast the recording on Tuesday. The president, who has long refused to release his tax returns, is especially sensitive to any moves by federal prosecutors to dig into his business affairs. After his election, Mr. Trump resigned his role in his company, allegedly, but retained his ownership and turned over management to his two oldest sons, Eric and Donald Jr. You remember what a fraud that appeared to be on its face. Asked by the Times a year ago whether Mr. Mueller would cross a red line if he began investigating the family businesses, Mr. Trump replied, "I would say yeah. I would say yes." He said it 2 times for whatever reason. Yet in some ways, it's harder for the president to criticize the New York prosecutors than it is to attack Mr. Mueller. His most fervent allies portray Mr. Mueller as a runaway prosecutor whose supervisor, Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, should be removed from office. You heard about that yesterday. We'll continue with this after the break. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching Kagro X or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. The break's over, and really we're through the meat of this piece here, and I think we probably, skip a couple of paragraphs and then grab something right down at the bottom from the conclusion. Where were we? Yes, let's say, okay, in some ways it is harder for the president to criticize the New York prosecutors than to attack Mueller, right? Remember, they're the ones pressing this case. But he certainly spent plenty of time attacking Mueller, calling it a witch hunt, etc. But the United States Attorney's Office in Manhattan has no special status, and its investigations into Mr. Cohen's activities appears to be proceeding like any other criminal inquiry so far. The president, who tends to approach legal issues as public relations problems, interesting, has directed his ire toward Mr. Cohen, I guess over the last day or two. Over the weekend, last weekend, Mr. Trump wrote on Twitter that secretly recording him was, quote, perhaps illegal. He added, inconceivable that a lawyer would tape a client. Totally unheard of. We'll get to that perhaps later on. Anyway, no indication that it was illegal in any way, but hey, who cares? He doesn't really care when he throws those sorts of accusations around very freely. All right, well, let's see. Mr. Weisselberg's loyalty is demonstrated. The last 3 paragraphs of the piece seem important, though I can't put my finger on precisely why, but maybe somebody who watched this proceeding more closely would know. Mr. Weisselberg's loyalty to Mr. Trump stood out in a recent deposition he gave for a lawsuit against the Trump Foundation. Filed last month by Barbara Underwood, the New York State Attorney General, the lawsuit accuses Mr. Trump and his adult children of improper political coordination with the presidential campaign and other illegal conduct. And I think I understand, what they're talking about here. We'll give the rest of this 2 paragraphs and then the context. One morning in January of 2016, Mr. Weisselberg recalled, he was abruptly asked to fly to Iowa with the foundation's checkbook for a campaign event that also served as a fundraiser for veterans. He raced through a dental appointment to make the plane that same evening. He started to explain why the checkbook was necessary, saying, in case there was any money being collected, which I thought was... Then he broke off, saying simply, it doesn't matter what I thought. He's my boss. I went. And that's sort of intriguing. That's the end of the article. And what an interesting way to trail off with this. And it suggests a couple of things. The event that I guess we're talking about is thing that went on relatively early in the campaign. I think this was when Trump announced that he was going to boycott one of the debates. And was it the CNN sponsored one because he was mad at CNN at the time? I don't remember exactly what the situation was. I'm not going to that stupid debate, the Republican primary debate. And instead, I'm going to have, he looked like a baby boycotting the event. So he needed something that was in his mind and the mind of other simpletons unassailable as an excuse. So the excuse was going to be, well, then I'll be doing a fundraiser for veterans. Nobody can attack somebody who's doing a fundraiser for veterans. So he threw together some event that was meant to look like it was a fundraiser for veterans. And, and he did that instead. So he was therefore, in his mind, immune from any criticism for having skipped the debate. And indeed, nobody paid attention to the fact that he skipped the debate. And nobody attacked this thing either. So he was entirely right about that, even though it was a fraud from top to bottom. And it was a fraud within a fraud because, of course, he used the Trump Foundation, which was never properly organized. And so, therefore, pretty much everything it did was in violation of tax law. But in addition, it was a giant self-dealing operation, as we've detailed in the show and as David Farenthold has detailed in his writings, from start to finish. And it wasn't his money. And in addition to it not being his money, it was very often used in self-dealing operations. In other words, he would use the foundation's checkbook to buy things for himself. So even though it wasn't his money, that wasn't itself a problem. If he had used the foundation's money for true charitable purposes, it wouldn't have been problematic in any legal way, though it would have been embarrassing in an ethical way. For him to go around and say this is the Donald J. Trump Foundation, knowing that everybody would assume that money from the Donald J. Trump Foundation represented the generosity of Donald J. Trump himself, when in fact it really represented only the generosity of, or the avarice, really, of others who contributed to the fund in hopes that they would curry some sort of favor with Trump. But he was representing these things as his own donations. Anyway, that doesn't even get to the fact that he was then using the Donald J. Trump Foundation, a tax-exempt, something that claimed to be a tax-exempt charity, for explicitly political purposes, for one thing, which would violate the tax status of the foundation, but also, therefore, illegally coordinating with his campaign, which is an entirely different violation. But because he's, he runs a family business with no outside ownership interest, he's never learned what the rules are about your fiscal and fiduciary responsibilities and firewalls and, barriers and boundaries that need to be respected in a normal business. So he just thinks of, there's a pool of money out there that I control through various mechanisms. I don't understand the mechanisms. All I know is I control it. And if I control this and I control that, then they're two identical things. In his mind, the fact that he controls the checkbook to the Donald J. Trump Foundation and controls the checkbook to the Donald Trump organization, the Trump organization, and he controls the checkbook of the Donald Trump presidential campaign. They're supposed to stay separate, do things separately, be represented by different officers, etc. But in his mind, look, I control all three checkbooks, therefore they are all the same thing, i.e. my money. And he doesn't recognize that there are restrictions, and he thinks all such restrictions are stupid bureaucracy, red tape, etc. And that's what's wrong with this country. Well, that may be the case, but that's what the law is, and just wishing it away doesn't mean you won't be charged with violating the law if you do things this way. So what he did, of course, was he brought the foundation's checkbook to do the work of the campaign. I'm skipping the debate, and I want instead to do a fundraiser for veterans, and I want the beneficiary of the goodwill of that event to fall on the Trump campaign. I therefore order the Trump Foundation to do all of this stuff and to pay for all of this stuff happening so that the Trump campaign can benefit. No, illegal under tax law, illegal under coordination campaign finance law. 2 strikes on that one. You're wrong on both counts. In addition to which, in all likelihood, I don't know who paid for Weisselberg's flight out there. And by the way, why did he have to rush through the dental appointment? He couldn't take one of the fleet of the Trump organization's fleet of private jets and take off when he was good and ready after the dental appointment, or just put the checkbook on the plane with a messenger and send it out there. It's interesting. And I guess that gets to his confusion about what he thought was necessary. Why did he have to go out there? Well, I thought in case there was any money being collected, which I thought was, and that's a good question. What is he thinking here? Like, why does the checkbook have to be there if money is being collected? It doesn't. Checkbook needs to be there if money is going out, which is a different thing. And maybe he needed the checkbook to be there in case money being collected for the veterans was somehow improper or too dirty to be included in this pool, and we would replace it with foundation money. I don't know. I don't know what he was thinking, but it certainly hints. Well, the fact that he changed gears and said, never mind, forget I said anything, essentially, was an indication that he may accidentally there have stumbled onto revealing that he had reason to worry that something illegal was going on there. And probably because something was illegal going, not probably. That's probably what motivated his thinking, but actually illegal things were happening. He probably knew that they were happening, but that's all. Okay, so I think that wraps up those questions. Let's see, any more? Well, Gideon still insists, no, Trump lying at some point does not invalidate privilege. And I guess it's an argument that you could make, although I would say you'd probably be on firmer grounds making it if you told me that you were familiar with the United States federal rules of evidence, and you might be. I mean, there's lots of international attorneys out there. But if you're trying to logic your way out of it, it doesn't always make the same sense in one's inherent sense of logic that it doesn't always lead you to the same conclusion that the United States federal rules of evidence leads you to. Sometimes it feels illogical. Sometimes it brings you to a different conclusion, but that's because it governs a different set of circumstances. And because it might not be ordinarily intuitive, that's why we write those things down and teach classes on the subject, to teach you that the conclusion you might reach as a layperson isn't necessarily the same conclusion you would reach as an officer of the court interpreting the rules and precedents surrounding them. It is not the conclusion that most American prosecutors would likely reach. But Gideon's not an American prosecutor. I don't fault you for coming up to, and who knows? You could be right. Remember, 5 justices on the Supreme Court might just decide that all previous privilege jurisprudence was wrong all along, and they want it to read something entirely different, no matter what the rules of evidence say on their face. But, I mean, well, I guess we could spend another hour trying to parse through that, but I guess I just kind of leave it at that point and say, Trump lying about the existence of privilege and then possibly lying later about the same privilege and its existence. Lying to in a way that asserts that the privilege did not exist until he needs it to exist, and then coming back and saying, oh, no, it does exist, creates a fairly serious problem. And all it really needs to, I guess maybe this is a way of putting it too, all it really needs to create is some doubt about the existence of the relationship and therefore the privilege, and the question of how to resolve it as a result of our system falls, in this case, to the special master. Donald Trump on day one says says something that implies that there's no attorney-client relationship and therefore can be no privilege. But on day 2 says, no, there absolutely was such a relationship, and therefore you would have to conclude that there is such a privilege, absent the crime-fraud exception, which is another part of the story. But in deciding as between whether he was telling the truth on day 1 or day 2, a decision needs to be reached. It may seem impossible. All we know is that on day 1, he may have lied in saying no, and on day 2, he may have lied, saying the answer was yes. Now, the answer was, or should be, we need to decide whether the answer was yes or no. We need to decide as between day 1 and day 2. We can't simply throw our hands up and say we know nothing. It's confusing, and you might decide wrong, but the job of the special master is to say once and for all, well, we're going to go with either day 1 or day 2. Now, that's reviewable, and an appeals court with no other information and no other mitigating circumstances could say, we feel you have decided wrongly, and in fact, they could do so without, they can, if they want, do it without any further evidence. But ordinarily, if they're going to reverse the decision of a lower court or special master in this case, they would want to offer up some reasoning for doing so. But I guess they don't have to. But ordinarily, you would say, well, there's no, the decision was a coin toss for you, and it was made, therefore, arbitrarily, and there's no real reason that the law demands that you land on the determination that there never was an attorney-client relationship here, and so therefore everything that proceeds thereafter, beginning with the assumption that there is no relationship, is wrong. Which is probably why in the ordinary course of things, somebody making such a decision would say, well, one of two things could have happened here. He's either lying on day 1 or he's lying on day 2. I guess there are some very narrow circumstances in which somebody could be presumed to have been lying on both days or somehow on neither if the nature of the relationship changed in the time in between, but then you'd get some clarifying information. So, though, if you're making this decision and you say, look, the preponderance of the evidence, in my view, is that he was telling the truth on day 1, that there was no attorney-client relationship. And you can handle things going forward on that and say, I just don't think. Now, in my view, that's probably not what happened. In my view, the preponderance of the evidence is, if anything, certainly that Donald Trump probably thought there was an attorney-client relationship. Now, he might be wrong about that, like we explained in reading the Lawfare article. The fact that he thinks of Michael Cohen as his attorney, though, doesn't by itself establish that there's an attorney-client relationship for the purpose of settling this case with Stormy Daniels. So, I don't know. I think he was lying on day 1 that he didn't know anything about it. He was probably telling the truth if that's what was happening, that later on he says, oh, yeah, I really did know, even if he's only saying it to try and protect the attorney-client privilege. So what you do with a case like that, if you're the special master, is you say, well, if it's the case that he was lying on day 1 and telling the truth on day 2, you can handle things one way. And if it's the case that it's the opposite, you can handle it a different way. And in both cases, the evidence gets in. So it's not a huge problem, but you can absolutely explain things in the alternative this way. You can even file your own pleadings as a party to the case. I believe X, but in case I don't believe X, Y takes care of the job. Pleading in the alternative is an absolutely acceptable practice in our system, and I think probably in yours too. So here's what you do. If you think that he was lying on day 1 when he said, I didn't know anything about these payments, then you can discount that statement and say, no, he was lying about not knowing. He really did know. And because he did know, he did, at that point, think he had an attorney-client relationship with Cohen and believed that the material produced in their discussion would be protected by the attorney-client privilege. However, it's not, in the end, excluded from evidence because of the crime-fraud exception. So even if he was lying on day 1, telling the truth on day 2, the evidence gets in under the crime-fraud exception. If, however, he was telling the truth on day 1 and lying on day 2, i.e., really didn't have an attorney-client relationship and only asserted that he did have one after the fact in the hopes that he would prevent this evidence from coming into court under the attorney-client privilege, then the answer here is no. At the critical moment, he said that thing, which leads us to believe that there was no such relationship, and so therefore the attorney-client privilege never existed in the first place. You don't need the crime-fraud exception in order to bring this evidence in because it's not protected by the privilege at all. So it comes out the same way. Now, had he said from the beginning we had an attorney-client privilege and, therefore it's protected, if he hadn't had the foresight or the understanding of the situation to claim that on day one and claim it again on day two, then your only avenue to getting that information or that evidence admitted in court is the crime-fraud exception, which may or may not be the strongest possible route to bringing it in. But he wasn't smart enough. He thought he thought he was being super clever. He thought he was avoiding trouble by saying, I didn't know anything about it. How can you hold me responsible for something I knew nothing about? Another one of those things that, you'd think maybe that his viewing of crime dramas on TV would have taught him that ignorance of the law is no excuse. But it's not ignorance of the law here, it's ignorance of the facts. And he thinks that should be an excuse, and very often it actually is. So I think he was just using that. I didn't know anything about it, and so therefore I can't be, guilty of having arranged this thing if I didn't know anything about it. But what he didn't realize was that by saying he knows nothing about it, he was saying something that could be taken as evidence on its face that there wasn't an attorney-client relationship, period. And I guess here, Gideon's, just to really beat this to death, make sure we answer the question as thoroughly as possible. Gideon is saying, well, if he's saying ask Michael, what he's really saying there is ask Michael because he's my attorney. Now, had he said that, ask Michael because he's my attorney representing me in this matter, as he was my attorney representing me in the matter from the beginning, then that would be an assertion that there was an attorney-client relationship, and we'd be stuck with the crime-fraud exception if we wanted to get this evidence into court. But he didn't say that because he's too dumb to say that. What he said is, I don't know anything about it. He said, ask Michael because he's the only one who knows anything about it. Not, I refer you to my attorney on this matter, but I don't know anything about it. Ask Michael. Those two statements together mean only one thing. I don't know anything about it, and you can ask Michael, who is an attorney and does represent me on some other issues, but clearly does not represent me on this one because I have no knowledge of it happening and I gave no authorization for it to happen. Therefore, there's no attorney-client relationship with Cohen, and you can ask him because he's a friend of mine who knows something about it, but not my attorney for these purposes. There was just some missing information in all there. If he was wise or understood what he was doing or had a real plan, he could have said, I am not answering that question. I refer you to my attorney. I deny the affair, period, and any further questions should be posed to my attorney, and that would have saved him the trouble. But instead, he says, not only do I deny the affair, I deny any knowledge of the alleged settlement over the alleged affair, which I deny. But he's not, he's not smart enough to do that. So he screwed it up. In my view, again, if 5 justices of the Supreme Court were eventually to say, no, rules don't mean what they say, then, well, we'd be stuck with that for the time being anyway. All right, well, we certainly have beat that crap to death, but it's important. I feel like I owe it to you to debate the questions as thoroughly as possible. I hope I've given it's difficult to do on the fly on the air too. It would be nice to pause, reflect, do a little bit of reading, grab a original source somewhere and say, this is what I'm talking about here. Take a look at that. But, radio. All right, let's see. What other fun things might we put on the record? I guess we ought to say, let's see. Further developments in the impeachment talks about, the impeachment resolution filed the other day about impeaching Rod Rosenstein. Mark Meadows, it is reported in The Hill, it says here in the headline, Meadows backs off impeaching Rosenstein after leadership talks. However, it is also the case, I understand, that Steve Scalise, and I still don't know whether he says Scalise or Scalise, has now said he wasn't among the original co-sponsors of the resolution, but he now says that he's actually on board with it. And he is a member of the leadership. So Republicans in disarray, ladies and gentlemen. It's a real storyline. I don't know that it means much because the resolution is likely going nowhere, but we'll put that on the record. Also on the record for the weekend, Russian hackers have a new target, and it's the first solid evidence of attempts at Russian interference in the 2018 midterm elections. Apparently, they were going after Senator Claire McCaskill. The Daily Beast reporting this. Russian hackers' new target, a vulnerable Democratic senator. New target, a vulnerable Democratic senator. Senator Claire McCaskill is a top target for Republicans looking to grow their slim Senate majority, or I guess defend, I should say, their Senate majority in 2018. Turns out Russia's fancy bear hackers are going after her staff, too. Andrew Desiderio and Kevin Poulsen on this piece. The Russian intelligence agency behind the 2016 election cyber attacks targeted Senator Claire McCaskill after she began her 2018 re-election campaign in earnest. A Daily Beast forensic analysis reveals. That makes the Missouri Democrat the first identified target of the Kremlin's 2018 election interference. McCaskill, who's been highly critical of Russia over the years, is widely considered to be among the most vulnerable Senate Democrats facing re-election this year, as Republicans hope to hold their slim majority in the Senate. It's the slimmest possible majority, of course. In 2016, President Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton by almost 20 points in the senator's home state of Missouri. There's no evidence to suggest that this attempt to lure McCaskill's staffers was successful. The precise purpose of the approach was also unclear. Asked about the hack attempt by Russia's GRU intelligence agency, McCaskill told the Daily Beast on Thursday that she wasn't prepared to discuss it. And then a paragraph of her saying she's not prepared to discuss it. The senator later released a statement asserting that the cyber attack was unsuccessful. In August of 2017, around the time of the hack attempt, Trump traveled to Missouri and chided McCaskill, telling the crowd, vote her out of office. Just this last week, however, Trump said on Twitter that he feared Russians would intervene in the 2018 midterm elections on behalf of Democrats, which most people took to be BS on its face. But lots of these stories are pointing out essentially that the hack began in earnest right after Trump called her out and singled her out as a target for defeat. I don't hang too much on that, except that I would say, well, it may clearly have been a signal to people that they should, hey, I was expecting you to be hacking this person because they're a Democratic senator running for re-election at a time when I would like Republicans to win. And really, honestly, for all the sophistication of the targeting that Russians were credited with, even without getting, granular level data stolen from the DNC, they would be smart enough on their own, I would think, to figure out that they ought to be targeting Democrats in the 2018 elections. It wouldn't need reminding by Trump. But I guess he thought that they were lax in beginning their program and wanted to remind them that she ought to be a target. So as that develops, we'll have to keep an eye on that one. By the way, one thing I made a conscious decision not to make a early focus, but I want to put it out there, although I'm reluctant because, we've been down this road before and it seems like it really always ends in frustration. But a widely circulated, widely shared article published on The Root by Michael Harriot is titled, thus, Evidence, wrong music there we are. The evidence shows hackers changed votes in the 2016 election, but no one will admit it. Now, there are lots of people out there who have been alleging that for a long time. And I will tell you, it's getting damn close to the point where it's now seems impossible to rule it out categorically, as has been the case before. But he does make an interesting and important point, which is to demonstrate for you at the beginning of the article how and why circumstantial evidence actually ought to be, it really is evidence. I mean, that's the second word in the phrase. Circumstantial evidence, we are also trained by television crime dramas to believe, is somehow weaker or lesser than real evidence, and that you can't convict somebody based on circumstantial evidence. But the truth is, most evidence that's offered is circumstantial evidence, and it is evidence, and all evidence is, well, evidence, not proof. They are different things. Evidence tends to prove things. Proof does the trick. Evidence is all an attempt at building a case that proves something, but it needs to be a cumulative affair usually, and circumstantial evidence is cumulative just like anything else. But it goes on to allege in this article what we so far have been avoiding saying, but that there is an awful lot of circumstantial evidence that basically suggests there was so much hacking of actual state election apparatus, and yet no claims that anything had happened, that it just seems...
From Daily Kos Radio.
Well, you know.
On networksradio.com.
Overly curious?
You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show.
With David Waldman.
Anyway, you get the picture, and there's plenty more to come from that picture and more. Next up on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. And take a quick look around. Oh my God, look here. Oregon GOP Commissioner Laurie Stegman switches parties, citing family separations as the final straw. That and much, much more, which I should have left more time to read, next.